Hello everyone, my name is Fox. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the AYANEO Air. Thank you very much to the AYA team for sending this out to me for review. There are a few concerns that I have with this device, but some of the concerns that you might have with regard to how this compares to the SteamDeck, we'll get into that in a moment. But for the most part, I do want to kind of say that if you tune a game's settings, you can take advantage of actually running really well on this particular device. The big thing that I want to talk about is how cohesive the entire experience with this particular device is, from the boxing experience all through. Like if you saw this on a shelf anywhere, this is super attractive, and there is a lot of care and attention to detail where there is consistency across the board. Like when you take a look at how the design of the Air is, there is a lot of attention to detail. The types of plastics used and how it feels in the hand are sensational. Now, those plastics might transfer thermal properties a little bit better, so there are some give and take, but there are ways that you can combat that as well. This video will be divided up into a few different segments. I'm going to first start off talking about the AYASpace app, which has grown on me. When it initially came out, I wasn't a big fan of it, but since with the introduction with the AYANEO Air, everything really is going well, and there has been incremental updates every day. I've been updating the device, the app every day, so really cool to see the consistent updates on that side. Then we're going to be talking about build quality next. Then we're going to start jumping into benchmarks. We're going to do a little comparison to SteamDeck just to give you an idea of what's going on, but how we can kind of pivot the tables to kind of understand how we could run things correctly on this particular device and set expectations. And we're going to talk about battery life and my particular recommendations with regard to the AYANEO Air or the AYANEO Air Pro. That's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and start getting into it. First, let's start talking about the AYASpace app. Now, the AYASpace app has come a long way. Initially, when it came out, I wasn't a big fan of it. There is still a little bit of tweaking that you need to do here and there. One of the great things that I like about this, the AYASpace app, is its ability to rapidly switch between 8 watt to 12 watt TDP. And as we get into this, when we start looking at the benchmarks of this become a little bit more apparent as to why these two TDPs are very well selected. And I agree with what AYA team has done, but we'll take a look at that cohesively as a whole later on. The other pretty cool thing about this is now that there are LEDs circling the analog sticks, you can actually change the colors of the LEDs, the patterns of the LEDs, the intensity of the LEDs, and the color of the LEDs. So really cool, fully functional set of tools that you have within the AYASpace app that allow you to fully customize those colors and patterns however you wish. It's super cool and a lot of fun. I myself particularly chose an orange set of colors to go with, so that is what I went with. There are also methods to change what the buttons do, so you can actually change the face button layout within the AYASpace app. So if you wanted to have a Nintendo layout with regard to ABYX or swap it back, you can actually do that there. You can do turbo buttons, you can do sensitivity of the analog sticks, sensitivity of the analog triggers. Really cool stuff all within the AYASpace app to fully customize exactly what you need, how you need within one app, and it's it's actually super nice. This is akin to the quick access menu on the Steam Deck. I would 100% recommend that you only use the AYASpace app as opposed to competing products. And if you use competing products, that you stop using AYASpace completely, because these two things can kind of compete and it becomes really jumbled up really fast. However, just the AYASpace app by itself is worthwhile and recommended to run as a baseline, especially because it's been getting updated all the time. Next, let's talk about build quality. All right, so up first, we're going to be talking about the build quality of this device. And for the most part, and I think a lot of people are going to be saying this thing hits it out of the park. How it feels in the hand, the quality of the material, just everything. If you were to reach into people's brains and kind of get an idea of what they wanted out of a handheld, I think this is really what you would anticipate people seeing. Like, if you just take a look at everything about this device, every little bit of the fit and finish is really just sensational. And then as long as we go at the top, just like how everything comes in, these full analog triggers, how it all sits, how it's presented, the fingerprint sensor with the power button, the minus and plus, like how it is, how it sits in your hand, where you're going to put your finger, everything is aligning to volume up, volume down, how you would anticipate it to be. We have the exhaust port here, and even just the color gradient from this blue to pink, and how it goes on to their case as well, so you can get a matching case. So This kind of attention to detail here is just really cool to see. Excellent job by AYANEO aligning with other companies and just really nailing the whole presentation, because this is sensational. Overall, we're going to go over this in this particular build quality. I love everything about it. There are some design principles that I am not on board with. However, they do execute them very well. We're going to go through all of them right in this particular build quality part of this review. Starting at the bottom, let's go ahead and talk about these speakers. So these downward firing speakers, these are going to leave you wanting. They aren't very punchy, not very loud. Bass, anything that's heavy bass will kind of reverberate inside of the case itself. I'm not a big fan of that. Lows and mids are, it's just, everything about it is just lackluster. I think that you're going to really be leaning on the 3.5mm audio jack or external Bluetooth headphones or speakers if you really want a better audio experience. And that's just something that I think most people are going to find that they align with. Now, this microSD card slot finally makes its debut on an AYANEO device. And really, it's just sensational here. This particular cover, how it all sits, how it folds back in, it is, I don't know what to say, but it just feels like a bigger company made it. Like, just the attention to detail, the fit and finish of it, it really is sensational how it all comes together here. On the bottom, we have a 3.5mm audio jack. We have two screws holding it all together to help us get to the inside. And then we have a USB-C port here, which can act for a power input as well as the top, so you can charge either way, which is a nice little feature. Along the bottom, we can see this nice contour, and then how your fingers and hands just slip into this. Very, very nice. The device is super light. The plastic, how it feels on your hands, it's really sensational, but we'll talk more about that in a second. Along the top, we have full analog triggers. Go ahead and take a look at that. And these just have a really good amount of tension here. The bumpers feel good along the entire range. Then we have these RC and LC, which are additional function buttons, and we'll get to that in the AYASpace app on the app itself. We'll talk about that in the build quality review here. And then even here with the plus and minus on a volume rocker, where you would hold it and how you'd press it, it is in line that you would just naturally, intuitively understand that this is volume up. So they place the buttons correctly. Everything is really nice. On the back, we have our intake, and then we have our exhaust here. Now, there's a lot to talk about here with regard to thermal radiation, thermal transference to this very nice plastic. Even though this plastic feels exceedingly nice, it does transfer heat rather well as well. So heat does start to transfer and radiate over into this part right here. I'll have a little thermal scan up as well. So this part does get warm even at 9 watt over time, which is the default TDP. Going to 12 watt will give you a more efficient use of the chip on this device itself. However, heat will also propagate further and you'll have even worse battery life. So I really would say that this is one of the core problems of the AYANEO Air, is that the device is really made for 8 watt and less, especially with the battery pack. So that's going to limit the types of functionality and gameplay that you're going to expect on this device. The other part here is that thermally, a lot of the heat transfers to this left side of this glass, and it does get hot. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Along the left edge, we're going to finish it off, and we'll start talking about the front-facing buttons. Now, these analog sticks, they are made by GuliKit. They have been making the rounds of late, so these are Hall-based sensors. Let's go ahead and open up a test here. Okay, so let's start taking a look at these analogs. Now, I'm a big fan of GuliKit's Hall-based sensors. Now, the other thing in here is that you can see that the AYA team has designed these for circularity. Now, my mouse is going here. Let me go ahead and just turn that off. That's one of the functions that I do recommend on the AYASpace app, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But you can see that this is based for circularity instead of creating a square, which is my preference. However, it is perfect. So if we were to go up and if we were to test for circularity here, you can see that we have, very low error rate here. 0.5% error. In terms of creating a perfect circle, these analog sticks do a fantastic job in that regard. So the AYA team really prefers this particular layout for the analog sticks. Again, that's not something that I find myself aligning with all that much. However, it is fine in use. It's perfect, and there is no error. So these GuliKit sensors are just really fantastic. Let's go ahead and take a look at how they treat magnetism. So we're going to try to go to the cardinal sensors, which is something that I'm not a big fan of. But you can see that they have pretty low sticky rate when it comes to the cardinal directions in terms of snapping to the cardinals. So you have really good range across the entire analogs. Fantastic job on the analog sticks. These are really well done. I want to talk a little bit here about the face buttons here, and overall these are membrane based, so the D-pad and the face buttons are membrane based. Now these are really, really nice. I love the feedback here. They are just sensationally crispy, really nice. There is no second guessing if you press the button or not. The spacing, how your thumb travels, being able to hit all of them, it's really just fantastic. The D-pad is also really good. Let's say a little bit of a fighting game here right now. So that's it for the D-pad. I mean, overall, I really have nothing bad to say about the D-pad. It is a very nice membrane-based D-pad. If you prefer membrane-based D-pads and membrane-based buttons, then you're going to have an excellent time here. Overall, the entirety of this device is really well designed. The last bit I want to talk about here is the display itself. Now, this is the first PC gaming handheld with an OLED display. This is a 5.5-inch 1920 by 1080 display. Technically, it's 1080 by 1920. It is a portrait-style screen that is rotated in this orientation, which is a little odd because typically it's rotated like that. If you can see on my camera, there's actually you can see the screen being drawn in this particular fashion. That means that if you turn VSync off, you will have screen tearing this way. So you would be able to see it, which is a little bit odd and a little counterintuitive to most people. However, that's something that you should be aware of. The other thing that we really need to note here is because it's OLED, there is very minimal ghosting here. If we take a look at this Blur Bursters video, you can see that as we're updating the screen, it really just comes across super fantastic. My camera is picking up a strobing as it is being drawn across the screen, but how it appears on my eyes is sensationally nice. The only thing we need to talk about is we are using the AMD's 5560U here, which overall is really good. We're going to talk about benchmarks in a second and how we can try to optimize for that. There are still some more things coming that way. Additionally, the battery on this device is really small. So we can see right here that we were maxing out at around a 28 watt-hour battery, and that is sensationally small for typical PC gaming handhelds. 28 watt-hour would be on the large end for an ARM-based handheld, but on a PC handheld, that really isn't a lot. The lowest that this machine will go is at 5 watt. So these are the two things that I would say are its biggest flaws. One of them is correctable by buying the Pro version of this, which will make it a little thicker, but I would very much recommend that you only get the Pro version. Additionally, I don't know by that thickness if that would help with the thermal transfer, thermal radiation at all. Those are the two big flaws that I find with the particular build quality of this device in terms of fit and finish and all the features. At this point, we're going to take a look at game benchmarks as well as game demos itself before we get into the conclusion of this review. Alright, so that's the build quality segment of this, and I addressed my two concerns that I have with this device, that being the battery life as well as heat transference to the outside plastics. Now, you do have a means of controlling this yourself by lowering the TDP. By default, the 9 watt TDP is a good baseline. I would say try to stay at 9 watt here and then just scale back other games and stuff so that in terms of settings to kind of work within that zone. You will minimize how much heat is delivered throughout the device, as well as maximizing your battery life. And we'll show graphs and stuff in a moment here. First, we're going to jump into benchmarks. So the first thing that I know a lot of people are going to be wondering about is what is the difference between the AYANEO Air versus the SteamDeck? Now, the thing that you have to note here is that the AYANEO Air is using a last generation GPU. The Vega GPU is what is going to be holding back everything on the AYANEO Air. So if we just compare a GPU bound test from the SteamDeck to AYANEO Air, you're going to see a gigantic difference. So if we take a look at this particular graph here, it becomes apparent, at every wattage where the SteamDeck sits against the AYANEO Air. Now, at lower wattages, we have these extreme differences because the AYANEO Air really doesn't start waking up until around 7 watt. So at that point is when you have a actual comparison starts, but because the SteamDeck is so good at low TDPs that this is what it actually looks like. As we go up in TDPs around 12 watt, we start getting around a little bit less than 2x difference, but that's basically the generational GPU difference that we're seeing. Now, the thing here that I want to make clear here is that the AYANEO Air GPU is last generation. However, the Zen 3 ZPUs are actually very good, and we can get 60 FPS in games by compensating for games. So instead of trying to match on GPU, you just use sub-resolutions. If you use sub-resolutions and then scale up using techniques like FSR, you can still have very good frame rate and still good image quality on this particular device. The bottom line here is the 5560U on the AYANEO Air is actually quite good. The only thing is you have to kind of tune things to make it run well. So let's go ahead and take a look at how things look in a CPU bound or a GPU bound way. All right, up first, we're going to be taking a look at a GPU bound test. Now I'm using Heaven at 1280 by 720. I'm using the Ultra preset with extreme tessellation here. And the thing to note here is that as we scale up in TDP, you can see an almost linear increase in performance as we go up in power. Now, the thing that I want to note here is that when we take a look at GPU bound problems, that there is no real benefit from the Zen 3 CPU side. We are within margins of error between these configurations. You can see that I have dual core, tri-core, quad core, and 6-core configurations. I am purposefully parking CPU cores to see if we can get better performance in any of these situations. Because we are a GPU bound test right now, we're only stressing the GPU. The CPUs, regardless of configuration, don't really help us in this situation. If we look at this graph, this kind of really explains a lot of what's going on here. This is, if we take a look at how much percentage increase it costs per watt versus a performance increase per watt, we get a bird's eye view of what's happening here. And we can see at 5 and 6 watt, the 5560U is basically starving for power. Nothing is really able to get done. Everything's at super low power. It's not really doing anything for us. We only start waking up the device when we start hitting 7 watt. At 7 watt, the device wakes up and you can start seeing things happening here. We have a ginormous increase in performance percentage with regard to how that looks against a power increase. And we can see that if we take a look at the red line here, the red line indicates performance increase per watt, and the blue line indicates power increase per watt in percentages. Okay, so if we take a look at this, we can see that we almost have a 2x increase in performance going from 6 watt to 7 watt. Okay, so you can kind of understand what's going on here. And if we kind of take a look at this, you can see it slowly goes down. And this is what we call diminishing returns. This is where we start seeing that the more power we push into the system, how much performance we're getting out is starting to become less and less. When we take a look at this, you can see that 9 watt is a sensational TDP. We're getting really good efficiency here in terms of how much power we're putting in and how much performance, the exchange of power performance that we're getting. And right around 12 and 13 watt is right where you want to stop putting more power into the system. That is where it becomes a fair trade, meaning the power you're putting in is the performance increase that you're getting. So if you're doing a 20% increase in power, you're getting a 20% increase in performance. But then that starts to segue into a bad zone when we start pushing more power. So going over 12 to 13 watt really isn't worthwhile if you're going to be doing GPU bound situations. You really want to cap out there, which is nice because that's where the AYASpace app kind of caps out anyway. Let's take a look at it from a CPU bound perspective. Okay, so here we're taking a look at core configurations per watt in Heaven at 720p. I'm using low and no tessellation whatsoever. In this particular segment, we can start seeing that different core configurations will give us slightly better performance because we are targeting CPUs more than GPU side. The GPU doesn't really need to be involved as much because we're striving for higher frame rate. We are in a CPU bound situation. This is where the AYANEO Air should be targeting, okay? When you are trying to make games, you're trying to use sub resolutions, you're trying to use low settings because that's where you're going to get better frame rate, and we can also start leveraging those Zen 3 CPUs in a better way. Taking a look at this chart, you can see that quad core, the yellow dot here, is typically the best configuration. So you more or less want to park 2 cores at any given time. However, that being said, 6 core at 12 watt and above really is within margins of error amongst all the other cores. So quad core is good at the lower end SKU, whereas 6 core, the default core configuration, is fine. This is not something that I would say that is necessary to do. It's just something that is available in certain apps, like in Cypher's TDP bat tool, which you can find on the GPT Discord. This type of stuff is a little bit easier to configure on those types of tools. Now, I'm just giving this kind of information just so you can kind of see it. But if we take a look at the quad core configuration in terms of performance increase for power increase, this is what we see. Here we can actually see that at 6 watt, the CPU side, and having the GPU really low, we can actually extract some performance, whereas on the GPU side, we got nothing. So on the CPU bound side, this is where, if we do very low stuff, low settings, this is where we're going to have that bigger benefit. 6 watt TDP is really the lowest that you should pretty much target as a generality in terms of usage. 7 watt, again, we see the system just wake up and is now in full use. We don't see that big jump, almost 2x increase over from 6 watt to 7 watt, but we still have a 1.6, a 60% increase from 6 watt to 7 watt. At 8 watt, we still have a very good efficiency. 9 watt, it's excellent. And right around 12 watt in low settings is where the exchange of power to performance really starts getting negative in our favor. As we start pushing more power into the system up to 20 watts, we really start getting less and less performance for our power dollar. So again, the device is a 12 watt device really at the top end. At 12 watt, you're really going to see maximum performance. 12, 13 watt, you're going to see the maximum gains there. You can push it forward and get marginal increases, but you're going to be really taxing how badly the small battery on the AYANEO Air is. Again, why I would recommend the Air Pro. The one thing that I wanted to show you guys was what the battery life difference is between the AYANEO Air and the AYANEO Air Pro. Because the AYANEO Air Pro has a 38 watt hour battery instead of a 28 watt hour battery, let's go ahead and take a look at what those differences are. So up first, we're going to take a look at the 28 watt hour battery. Okay, so this is what the 28 watt hour battery looks like from a bird's eye view. If we take a look at the bottom, the TDP is UC 5, 10, 15, 20. Every increment from those, if we take a look at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it becomes a little bit more clear what type of power we're getting. Now, the thing to note here is I am not taking TDP power and comparing that against the battery. I'm comparing total system power, the pull from the battery. So that means at 10 watt TDP, we're actually pulling from the battery between 17.5 watt to 19 watt of power from the battery. And that's depending on minimum brightness of the panel and the LEDs on the analog rings off versus max brightness on the OLED and max brightness on the LED rings on the analogs, okay? So this variance that you see between these two, you're gonna get battery life anywhere between this valley. So at 10 watt TDP on the 28 watt hour battery, the non-pro unit, at 10 watt TDP, you're going to be looking at 96 minutes to 88 minutes of battery life. Likewise, if we take a look at really the top end of where we should be going on this machine, you're gonna be looking at 82 minutes of battery life or 73 minutes of battery life at the top end versus where the default TDP is on this device, which is 9 watt, you're going to be looking at 108 minutes of battery life to 93 minutes. Anywhere inside of that zone when the machine is in use, not when the device is idle. When you're playing a game at these TDPs, typically it's going to be at that TDP and nothing more. Now the TDP is one thing, but the rest of the system still takes power. So this is what that is reflecting. However, if we were to take a look at what the Pro battery is, now this graph is showing a 38 watt hour battery curve. Now the thing is, I don't actually need a 38 watt hour battery to get these numbers. It's just math. It's simple stuff. This is what it is. So if we were to compare, remember that we got 82 minutes to 73 minutes of battery life on the non-Pro version, the 28 watt hour battery. If we take a look at 12 watt here with the 38 watt hour battery, we get 111 minutes to 99 minutes at the 12 watt scope. We're almost at 2 hours here instead of being almost like 90 minutes. So this is where that extra battery starts to come into play. I do realize that there's some extra thickness, but I will say that extra thickness that is on the device should have other thermal characteristics in terms of transfer radiation, thermal radiation to the exterior plastic. I don't know. That's one thing that I can't tell how that is affected. However, I can tell you what the battery life is on the 38 watt hour device. And that's what this looks like across the board at the 9 watt TDP, the default configuration of the AYANEO Air Pro. You look at 147 minutes to 127 minutes of battery life. Basically above 2 hours, which is what I consider really just the absolute minimum battery life. So again, my only recommendation for the AYANEO Air is the Pro only model. The AYANEO Air regular with the 28 watt hour battery is anemic for a PC gaming handheld. All right, up next, we're going to be taking a look at some game demos with some different TDP ranges in there just to give you a kind of an idea of where we can run. Just because we're not going to have the same GPU as a SteamDeck, there is still some worthwhile stuff that we can play on this device, especially with it being as small as it is. If you didn't like the SteamDeck being as large as it is, this is a super nice device. Again, I would say get the Pro version, but I have full confidence that's going to be still super nice. So let's go ahead and take a look at some game demos, and then we'll get to the conclusion of this review.
Famous pork chops again tomorrow? What do you mean? You can get cargo scripting plan. What the hell is that? Look, I don't need my wife gyrating the whole world to see. God, that is fucked up. Oh, fuck. Planes outside White Run are right with me.
All right, so that is my review on the AYANEO Air. I would very much recommend that if you were looking into this device, only get the Pro version, please. I think it's super worthwhile if you wanted a device that was small. The bottom line is that this is what we're looking at here. If you were the type of person that were to look at the Steam Deck and say, you know, this device is just too large for me, fine. This device is fantastic. It's also the first device with OLED on a PC gaming handheld. I'm really happy with the overall results that the Aya team has done here. The fit and finish, build quality, just absolutely fantastic. The only thing I would say is get the Pro model, which Aya team sells. Get the one with the bigger battery. It'll be a little bit thicker. You're going to have a much better time with that bigger battery. If you were really interested in PC gaming handhelds, but the Steam Deck just wasn't your cup of tea, I really can't say enough of how just absolutely beautiful this device is. When you take it out, it is almost as if they were to have taken something out of the imagination from someone that wanted a device like this and made it reality. The Aya team did a fantastic job here across the board. Again, just make sure you get the Pro model if you're interested. That's the end of this review on the AYANEO Air. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.